You're listening to episode number 54. Does getting a PhD help you long term? Pro versus con. Welcome to another episode of The Effective Statistician with Alexander Schacht and Benjamin Pieskes, a weekly podcast for statisticians in the health sector designed to improve your leadership skills, widen your business acumen, and enhance your efficiency. If you have not yet done that, connect with me on LinkedIn because I'm regularly posting there additional news. I'm sharing relevant articles and lots of other useful content for statisticians. And that would be very, very nice to get you there and help you there overall. In this episode today, we talk about benefits and limitations of going for a PhD. And this is a very particular episode because I went for a PhD and finished that, whereas Benjamin directly started with his job at a zero. So we can talk about this from these two different perspectives, what it means short-term, long-term, what are the different applications, what are the different aspects to think about. This podcast is created in association with PSI, a global member organization dedicated to leading and promoting best practice and industry initiatives. Join PSI today to further develop your statistical capabilities with access to special interest groups, the video-on-demand content library, free registration to all PSI webinars, and much, much more. Visit the PSI website at psiweb.org to learn more about PSI activities and become a PSI member today. Welcome to another episode of The Effective Statistician, and today it's again my co-host Benjamin and myself. Hi Benjamin, how are you doing?
Hello, Dr. Alexander.
Yeah, today it's about the PhD, and there's actually one difference between the two of us. I decided to pursue one in Göttingen, and Benjamin didn't.
Yep, you may call me Mr. Non-PhD. No, actually, that's why I had enough after university, so I really was looking for something else to do.
Yes.
So why did you stay then for doing a PhD?
Actually, I really enjoyed my time at university, and I was really interested to go deeper on my master thesis topic and expand on that. And it was really a great time at university, because I was basically living on the cost of a student, more or less. And I was earning some money via the project that I was supporting at the Statistics Institute. And there was lots of mutual benefits between the Statistics Institute, the doing the PhD, and working there at the clinic, getting some first experience in consulting with physicians there. Working on their projects and helping them drive these things forward. So it was really, really a nice time. And also I had a really amazing working group I was working in. And it was, the same people that I did my master thesis together with. We all went ahead and went to work on our PhDs at the same time. So that was just a lot of fun.
I know the institute. I mean, for the listeners, probably that we did the same. We did the diploma thesis or the master at the same institute in Göttingen at the university. So I exactly know what you're talking about. And actually, I started my master at the time when you had your PhD almost finished. So I think there was an overlap of a few months or half a year, maybe maximum. So that's it's an it was a great opportunity for me as well to work at the time of the master thesis. But still, probably also because I felt a little bit, at my limits of maybe with the theory of mathematics, and I really want to get into the practice. So that's why I didn't really pursue staying at university, but doing rather like work, real work in industry. So
yeah, and that's really the topic of the day: the pros and cons of doing a PhD or not doing a PhD. And to give you a little bit of a warning, you'll not get a clear recommendation from us today.
Actually, there's no clear guidance on that. I think this is really a personal decision, obviously.
But hopefully the discussions that Benjamin and myself will have give you some insights in whether you want to do it, and maybe you want to actually pursue it, after a couple of years in the pharma industry. So I know people that went ahead and then worked only part-time, and in the other times they worked on their PhD. And so we're not specifically talking about that. When I did my PhD, that was directly after my master thesis, and I even considered a little bit of switching universities at that time. But just because of the points that I just raised, it was an easy decision to stay and move on.
Yeah, that thought I actually had as well. I think 3 years after I started at my, with the company that I'm still working on, I had the thought of doing the PhD parallel and try. And I think I was even in contact with you regarding this. You had a recommendation from some professor in the Netherlands, I believe.
Yeah,
and so there was some activity on this one, but at the end it didn't work out for me, and also like personally it was quite tricky. But that's really like a good opportunity as well, especially if the company plays along and allows you to work part-time, and so if there's, for example, no opportunity for the university to pay you a little bit of money, if you're involved in sponsored project, for example, then they have usually the budget for this. But if not, and you are doing this with PhD, really for the PhD itself, in parallel of your work, then I think it's a good opportunity as well to consider this.
Yeah. So let's first dive a little bit into the pros of why doing a PhD would be very, very good. And obviously, I will argue a little bit in terms of that.
Me too.
And one point is that some companies actually provide more long-term opportunities for those that have a PhD. So there are some companies that value this PhD very, very high. And if you want to have a very, very long-term career view on it, the PhD can actually accelerate things. And you might get to bigger areas where you don't get without a PhD. Because if you look into these research areas, there's lots of other functions where a PhD is nearly required, and people will, want to work with other people that have a PhD. And so that's where that is sometimes coming from, even if it's for kind of management level kind of jobs, where, to be honest, the PhD itself, so the technical learnings that you get from that, probably isn't so much needed.
Yeah, I think it's maybe one step back before we discuss the pro and cons. Maybe just one word about the PhD itself. I mean, obviously there's different jobs for statisticians. So and I think whatever we discuss here now is it doesn't cover all opportunities. So as you said, if you go into statistical research within a pharma company, then a PhD is definitely more helpful as if you go into like a tiny CRO job where the statistician and statistical programmer is basically a combined job role, and you're focusing on programming and half the time. And so it's really about what do you want to do, what do you want to aim in your career. And therefore there's a really, for some of the jobs, it is definitely, an added value to have a PhD. Maybe not necessarily, but at least potentially, and in others it's just not. So therefore, there's a wide range of opportunities that you have, as you know, as a statistician and related jobs, and therefore, it is. The decision of doing a PhD is not really like about going through points of pros and cons. It's really about what do you want to do with this.
Yeah.
Okay,
of course.
That's the thought. But
but I think there's an important point. If you speak about a variety of jobs, of course, there's also an association with seniority and experience. If you want to get to certain jobs, you just need to have maybe 10 years of experience. And if you're in the situation that you're just about to start your career as in the pharma industry, then that basically is, 10 years ahead of us, of you. Can you really think that far in the future what you want to do at that time point? So I think the PhD may give you, in the long run, more opportunities. But of course, that is kind of predicting in 10 years' time, and that, these things don't change so much in 10 years' time. But
fully agree. It's just that for the decision before you do a PhD, and maybe after, in the situation that we were after doing the master, it's really kind of you have a feeling of whether, for example, theoretical statistics is more what you favor, or is it really using, like, doing the practice use? So for theoretical statistics, obviously, in the academic career, or also in the pharma, like I said, like in a methodological department or environment, it's an advantage for a PhD, and you won't even probably get into that department or into this job without a PhD. That's why that's a decision. I mean, you have to break it down into the type of the step of your career. So if you're in the beginning of your career, obviously you have other questions that you can challenge yourself on. Then you have 10 years experience.
Yeah.
So definitely.
Yeah, and of course there's a variation between the different companies. So some companies are much more kind of focused on PhDs, and some other companies don't care so much about it. So there's lots of variations there as well.
And taking the point that you had earlier about the long-term opportunities for those with a PhD, I think it's also short-term opportunities that you have with a PhD. Speaking about salary, for example, usually there's a different salary range for this additional education, this additional PhD that you have compared to having only a master. Which, on the other hand, I don't know if it really pays out. It may pay out at the end of the day or end of the life, maybe, because you usually spend 3, 4, 5 years extra on doing the PhD, while the master student already had 5 years of earnings. So it might be different steps of career. So it's kind of theoretically that you get a higher level of, sometimes, or quite often, I believe, get a higher level of payment than you have with the PhD.
Yeah, so the entry position is surely a difference between master and PhD levels. In terms of, by the way, we are speaking here lots of time about master, and of course you can also finish with a bachelor. But usually I encourage people to do a master's as well, just as a side note. So in terms of other things that I considered for my PhD, or that I actually found out later, is it really gives you more kind of trust status as an expert at the beginning. So of course, that isn't so important after a couple of months or years that you have worked with people, but at the first time you meet with people, that gives a different, that's just a different trust level and expert levels that you get.
No, yeah, it's true. It's the first impression, if you have a PhD, Dr. Alexander, it's more impressive than just Mr. Alexander.
Yep.
So, yeah, but and also I think we are working in the medical environment quite often as statisticians, at least in the pharma in the environment, and I think since we are working with medics quite often who usually have a PhD, that allows you to have a better entry, or to be on the same, or maybe they think that you are on the same level as they are. And I don't know how often actually I experienced that without being asked. I had in invitations, I was approached by medical doctors via email, and the communication that I had with them due to the work with Dr. Pieske.
Yeah.
Because we were just assuming kind of that if you don't say anything, you have a doctor, you have a PhD.
Yeah.
Which proves this point to be right, that's quite a good entry or like ticket to them, towards them, so they appreciate, or they understand, or they take you probably more serious than you do with other.
Yeah. So, but it's not only on the medical side, which, they are very proud about their MDs. It's also, if you work in the earlier phases and you work with biologists or chemists, most of them will have a PhD, especially in these areas. So that's also another position. There's other areas, of course, in your business where rarely someone will have a PhD. So if you work with PRA or with health outcome people or with marketing, very rarely someone will have a PhD, of course.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but actually, even though what I said, I think it's easier to get in there, but I don't think that I had any bad experience really without a PhD either.
No.
So if you prove yourself, if you prove yourself to be an expert or to be the person that they require, I mean, it's just you have to prove it, then it works as well. It's not necessarily a PhD. It might make the life easier, but it's not the only ticket that you can you need to be on the level with them.
It's just that in situations where you maybe sit on a podium or things like that, is where that makes a difference, and the on some agendas or stuff like that. So that's really the point. Another point that I really enjoyed about the PhD is it gave me the opportunity to have a really good time at university, not only for the fun part, but also for the overall personal growth. So I explored lots of activities. I had the opportunity to dive very, very deeply into certain technical problems that I never had later in the job. It gave me the opportunity to learn about a wide range of things on statistics. I had the opportunity to learn about simulations, learn about various methodological approaches, very deeply understand these various methodological approaches, work on publications, these type of things. And I got a very, very good training in terms of presentation skills during that time. Mm-hmm. So these were all very, very good things. And also the consulting work within the clinic was really a lot of things that I learned, which helped me tremendously later in career.
Yeah, I think for the soft skills, that's definitely something where you can learn a lot, and also statistical expertise and stuff like this. I think where I would say it's not very helpful to continue to work for several years in the academic environment is the experience of academia. Like the environment itself. So I think this is not comparable to the economical working industry.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
and I
there's a
think
huge difference. Yeah,
there's a huge difference, and that is sometimes what I see is that for example, for applications for jobs, that people simply don't understand some questions because they have never experienced anything like this.
yeah,
I wouldn't say,
yeah.
no, I can't think of an example. I mean, for example, it kind of time pressure, not necessarily, but the pressure that a sponsor, for example, has on, for economic reasons on finishing a study or delivering something. That is a
Yeah.
pressure that you never experience in academic environment.
No, yeah,
So
completely agree. So the time pressure is something completely different. And one thing that is also very different is, in my experience, you are working very, very self-driven and self-organized when working on your PhD. So you're not working in this network and framework of a company, where there's everything kind of set up to make you move forward, pull you move forward. When you are working on your PhD, you need to push yourself all the time. But I think, that is also something that you really learn there, to push yourself forward and move forward much more independently than, in the usual time of your studies, where things are much more kind of organized and there's these specific courses that you all need to take. So my experience was that the PhD time was a much more free time to study as well.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, I think the time or the freedom that you have in university environment in many ways is different to the industry environment, which is good on the one side, to learn for yourself, and with the pressure to pressure yourself and to challenge yourself more, and to have maybe to have presentation for a conference as a time pressure, if you like. But
Yeah.
otherwise it's different to the usual environment that you have in the industry. However, I think some of the institutes are moving away from that. I was actually going to say that, for example, we do have SOPs and regulations and stuff what we need to follow, and kind of it's kind of a narrowed environment where we can work within certain limits and frames, and I think this is what you usually don't have at the university. However, I think this is a little bit changing for some of the more applied parts of university, where you have institutes that are working closely with industry together. So there might be some areas which is between the classical university environment and the industry.
Yeah, I can relate to that. So there's of course changes there that's happening. And one warning in terms of working on a PhD is surely you need to be passionate about your project, your topic, because you work on it for quite a long time. And if you're not passionate about your research topic, it's quite a long time to work
The
on
time is getting
something like
longer.
that. Yeah, but if I was really passionate about it, and it gets you the additional opportunity to publish methodologically, to present at conferences, and of course that gets you a lot of additional exposure for job search later on. So if you have that strategy in mind when starting your PhD, that's another pro in terms of working on the PhD.
Yeah, no, that's true. I mean, I'm not sure if I would have been in this situation of understanding really what I was looking for, when I'm looking for a job.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the difference that if you work in the industry and then you kind of understand where things are coming from or going to, and kind of have a better understanding of what you prefer to do or where you would aim for. But if you work in the academic environment and then aim for a job in the industry, it might be also quite difficult to understand whether the decision you do is then the right one.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I was really clear about this, but it's kind of, it's you're not experienced in the environment that you are looking for working into. So that's why it might be quite theoretically that there's an additional exposure for job search. I mean, obviously, if you're presenting at conferences, people might get up to you and ask you, to get in contact with you. So there's a networking activity, but it may or may not be a successful support for your further search.
Yeah. And of course, on the downside, there's a couple of things, for working on a PhD. So for sure, it's costly. It's also, you may earn something for a living. Of course, there's these opportunity costs that for a couple of years you definitely earn much less than you would do if you directly start in the industry. There was a pretty significant gap between these salaries in my time, and I'm pretty sure it's still existing, if not becoming bigger. And and of course, as we talked about, you don't collect experience within the pharma industry. So when I was interviewing after my PhD, I got together with a couple of other colleagues that were a couple of years younger than me, and in addition already had a couple of years of experience. But that was a little bit of a combination, because I also we had 13 years of school in Germany, plus an additional year of national service, plus 5 years for the diploma student, plus 2.5 years for my PhD. So that really summed up versus, if you have if you start in university, at the age of 18 and then go for 3 years, and then you're 21 or 22 and start your career. Well, I was basically, just after my first year at university at that age. Yeah. So
yeah, that relates to the point that that the experience, if you end up in the industry, and if you like to end up in the industry, then the industry experience is probably more worth than continue working on the academic environment.
Yeah. So there is, I'm not sure whether it's more worth, but it has a lot of value, and in certain positions it actually will have more value. So for sure. And for sure in the short term, because if you look at then similar age people that have already a couple of years of experience in the companies, they work much more effectively than those that start new with a PhD. And these new starters with a PhD that just takes a couple of years until they really catch up.
Yeah, and there are other downsides. I think it's one of the on the one side you mentioned that it's really you should be thrilled and happy to continue working on a specific topic and enthusiastic about it. But on the other hand, it also means that for 2.5 or even longer years, you are working on one specific topic. And only one specific topic. I mean, in Göttingen, there was a chance to kind of move around due to the fact that you're working with or doing consultancy, and then they're touching other topics. But in general, if it's only about the PhD, you are really working on one single topic. Might be a little wider, might be narrower, but in the same time, like a CRO statistician, you usually had like 10 different studies with 5 different therapeutic areas, and I don't know how many methodology type of things touched. So it's really something where you need to be clear that you are very focusing for a long time on a very narrow field of statistics, and you may find out that it's not even relevant. So, I mean, hopefully not, but it's just that it might not be applicable for the environment that you're then working on. I mean, there are many topics which theoretically are being worked on, but in reality, it's just not
used. Yeah. Sometimes there's really, you can easily build up some ivory tower expertise without really knowing it, because all your other colleagues at that institute also work on this ivory tower expertise, and you don't see so much outside, and so that is a threat. And but I think you need to be clever about then, having a good surroundings there, having exposure to biological research or other life science research, where you have more applications, and that will just force you to see, a wider and how your actual research topic for your PhD is applicable in these areas.
And also, I mean, it's not necessarily for PhD, but also for master, for example. Don't forget that working on a very specific topic and going through like a lot of the hurdles and pain probably in that time, it's also about the soft skills that you gain around that. So increasing frustration limits and working for yourself and concentrating on a topic and diving into a topic. So this is really also about not necessarily the statistical expertise for that one, but really about the soft skills that you learn doing a PhD in statistics.
Yeah. You learn very different soft skills than what you would learn at a company. Yeah, absolutely. In terms of working on that, it may take a long time to finish your PhD. You may run into problems that you have not seen early on in the project. And there's, of course, also the risk of never completing it.
Yeah.
So
that's true.
Yeah. So let's face it, not everybody that starts a PhD is finishing it.
Yeah, and going back to the long time and that it may take, I mean, that's also kind of connected to, for example, if you're working on sponsor projects, that they're just limited to a certain number of years. So you basically run out of budget at the end of the PhD if you find unforeseen problems or issues. So it's indeed a risk, for also like a financial risk that you will fail because of financial pressure.
So if you want to consider a PhD, I hope that these half an hour of discussion between Benjamin and myself helped you to understand what are the pros and what are the cons, and really look into yourself, what are the priorities for you, and make an informed decision about if and where to pursue your career in terms of PhD, or go directly into the industry, or maybe, evaluate later if you want to do a PhD later on in your career. Okay, thanks so much, Benjamin. Always nice talking to you.
See you too. Bye-bye.
This show was created in association with PSI. Thanks for listening. As always, just go to theeffectivestatistician.com to find the show notes and learn more about our podcast to boost your career as a statistician in the health sector. And please recommend this podcast to other colleagues who are interested in boosting their career. Ciao.